Somewhere in the Persian Gulf right now, 400 oil tankers are sitting completely still. They can't move forward, they can't go back, they're trapped. And the single waterway that controls roughly a third of all the oil shipped on Earth has been declared closed by Iran. This isn't a drill, this isn't a simulation, this is happening right now, and the price of oil has already blasted past $120 a barrel and climbing. But here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you. There is a $100 billion plan, a plan so audacious, so expensive, so geopolitically explosive that if it moves forward, it could either save the global economy or trigger the biggest oil shock in modern history. I'm Rachel Meadow, and tonight we go deep. Let's start with the basics, because you need to understand exactly what's at stake before we talk about the $100 billion solution. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow strip of water, at its tightest point, just 21 miles wide, sitting between Iran on one side and Oman and the UAE on the other. 21 miles. That's roughly the distance from downtown New York City to Newark, New Jersey. And through that tiny, narrow, impossibly small stretch of water flows 14 million barrels of crude oil every single day. Let that sink in. Every morning, every afternoon, every night, giant supertankers, each one carrying millions of dollars worth of oil, line up like cars on a highway and push through those 21 miles. Saudi Arabia's oil goes through there, Iraq's oil, Kuwait's, the UAE's, Qatar's liquefied natural gas. If you drive a car in Europe, Asia, or America, there's a very real chance the fuel in your tank passed through the Strait of Hormuz at some point in its journey. This is the jugular vein of the global economy, and Iran just put its hand around it. On March 2, 2026, just days after a series of U.S. and Israeli airstrikes targeted Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure in what was called Operation Epic Fury, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps made a stunning announcement. The Strait of Hormuz was closed. Not congested, not risky, closed. For the first time in modern history, the world's most critical oil corridor was being used as a weapon, and roughly 100 tankers that normally pass through daily were suddenly going nowhere. Markets panicked, oil prices surged, and governments around the world started asking the same terrifying question: is there another way? The answer, at least on paper, has existed for decades. It's called the Musandam Canal, and to understand it, you need to look at a map of Oman. Oman sits in a unique geographic position. Its northern tip, a rugged, mountainous finger of land called the Musandam Peninsula, actually pokes into the Gulf of Oman, sitting just outside the Strait of Hormuz. The proposal? Blast a canal straight through that mountain range. Carve a waterway wide enough and deep enough for the world's largest supertankers to sail through, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Ships would load up in the Gulf, sail north, cut through Oman via this man-made canal, and emerge safely into the Arabian Sea and beyond. No Iran, no choke point, no 21-mile bottleneck held hostage by geopolitics. It sounds almost too good to be true. And the price tag? Conservatively estimated at over $100 billion. For context, the famous Panama Canal expansion, which took a decade and reshaped global shipping, cost around $5 billion. The Musandam Canal would cost 20 times that. But here's where it gets really interesting, because this isn't just an old idea that got dusted off when things got tense. This concept has been discussed, quietly, seriously, at the highest levels of Gulf state governments for years. Saudi Arabia knows it, the UAE knows it, the United States knows it. Everyone has always known that the Strait of Hormuz was a single point of failure, a loaded gun pointed directly at the heart of the global economy. And for years, the answer has always been the same. It's too expensive, it's too complicated, Iran probably won't actually do it. Well, Iran did it. Now, before we get back to the canal, we have to talk about what the world is actually doing right now to cope with the closure, because there are existing bypass routes, and they are being pushed to their absolute breaking point. The first one is Saudi Arabia's east-west crude oil pipeline, known as the Petroline. It stretches 1,200 kilometers across the Arabian Peninsula, from Saudi Arabia's massive Abqaiq processing complex all the way to the Red Sea port city of Yanbu. Theoretically, it can move up to 7 million barrels of oil per day, without touching the Strait of Hormuz at all. Sounds like a solution, right? Here's the problem. The port terminals at Yanbu can only actually load about 3 to 4.5 million barrels per day under the best conditions. And under current wartime pressure? Closer to 3 million. Remember, the strait normally handles 14 million barrels a day. So even at full sprint, the Petroline covers barely 1/5 of what the world needs. The second bypass option belongs to the UAE, the Abu Dhabi Crude Oil Pipeline, or ADCOP. It runs 380 kilometers from Abu Dhabi's oil fields to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman coast, neatly avoiding the strait. But again, capacity is the killer. Under current emergency conditions, Fujairah can handle a fraction of what's needed. And then came the news that made everyone's blood run cold. The port of Salalah, Oman's deep-water southern hub, which had been positioned as one of the most promising alternative shipping routes, was hit by Iranian Shahed 136 drones. Fuel tanks burning. The London insurance market responded almost immediately, adding Omani waters to its high-risk zone list, meaning insurance costs for every ship trying to use any alternative southern route just exploded overnight. The bypass routes exist, but they are bending under the pressure, and some of them are already breaking. Washington did not stay quiet. On March 6th, just 4 days after Iran declared the strait closed, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation announced an emergency plan to provide reinsurance for vessels attempting to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. The idea was simple. If private insurance companies are too scared to cover tankers sailing into a war zone, the United States government will back them up. It was framed as a move to, quote, restore confidence in maritime trade and support American and allied businesses. But let's be honest about what this really is. This is Washington blinking first in an economic standoff with Tehran. This is the U.S. government essentially saying, we will absorb the financial risk so the oil can keep flowing. And then came the bigger headline. President Trump signaled that the U.S. Navy was prepared to physically escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Armed warships, flanking supertankers, daring Iran to fire. It is the most aggressive economic protection operation the United States has considered in decades, and the White House admitted they had no timeline for when it would actually be safe for commercial shipping again. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful military in human history is being prepared to babysit oil tankers through a 21-mile strip of water, because no one has ever built the alternative. So let's come back to the central question. If everyone has known about the Musandam Canal concept for decades, if the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz has been obvious for generations, why hasn't it been built? The answer isn't just money. The answer is politics, power, and pride. First, the money. $100 billion is not a number that any single country can just write a check for. Even Saudi Arabia, even the UAE, even a coalition of Gulf states would need international partners, international financing, and a level of economic cooperation that simply hasn't existed, until now, perhaps. Second, Oman's position. The canal would have to run through Omani territory, and Oman has historically played a very different diplomatic role than its Gulf neighbors. It maintains open backchannels with Iran. It has deliberately stayed neutral in Saudi-Iranian tensions. Building a canal through its mountain range that explicitly exists to cut Iran out of global shipping influence? That's a massive geopolitical statement, one Oman has never been willing to make in peacetime. Third, and this is the one nobody wants to say out loud, the canal doesn't actually solve the problem. A canal is just a different choke point. Instead of 21 miles of Iranian-adjacent water, you have a man-made trench through Omani mountains that could be bombed, blocked, or sabotaged. Critics have pointed out that moving the world's oil dependency from a natural strait to a constructed canal simply relocates the vulnerability. It doesn't eliminate it. And Oman already proved this point when Salalah got droned. The geography changes, the danger doesn't. So where does this all go? There are 3 realistic scenarios playing out right now, and the one that wins will determine whether your gas prices double, your economy wobbles, or something far darker unfolds. Scenario 1. The naval gamble works. The U.S. Navy escorts tankers through the strait. Iran makes noise but doesn't fire on American warships. Insurance markets stabilize. Oil prices pull back from $120 and settle somewhere painful but survivable, around $90 to $100 a barrel. The crisis eases, and the Musandam Canal goes back to being a fascinating idea that nobody actually funds. This is the best-case scenario. It's also the most fragile, because it depends entirely on Iran choosing not to escalate. Scenario 2. The standoff grinds on. Iran doesn't fire, but it doesn't reopen the strait either. Weeks turn into months. The bypass pipelines max out. Global oil inventories drain. Prices stay above $120. Inflation reignites in Europe, Asia, and America. Recession risk climbs. In this scenario, the conversation about the $100 billion canal becomes very, very serious very fast. Gulf state sovereign wealth funds start taking calls. The UAE and Saudi Arabia push Oman hard. The U.S. offers financing. The canal might not get built, but the political will to build it, which has never truly existed before, begins to form. Scenario 3. Escalation. A U.S. Navy escort goes wrong. A drone hits the wrong target. Someone fires. Iran responds by attacking pipeline infrastructure on land. Salalah, Yanbu, Fujairah, all under fire simultaneously. In this scenario, there is no bypass route that functions. There is no canal. There is no pipeline. The world is looking at an oil shock that makes the 1973 embargo look mild, and a global recession that arrives not in months, but in weeks. This is the nightmare. And every analyst watching the Persian Gulf right now will quietly tell you it is not off the table. Here is the bottom line that nobody in power wants to say plainly. The world has known for 50 years that routing 1/3 of its oil supply through a 21-mile strip of water controlled by a hostile power was a catastrophic risk. The world chose every single year not to spend the money to fix it, because oil was cheap, because the alternative was expensive, because every year that nothing bad happened felt like proof that nothing bad ever would happen. And now, 400 tankers sit motionless in the Gulf. Oil is at $120 and rising. The U.S. Navy is preparing to put warships between supertankers and Iranian missiles. And somewhere in a boardroom in Abu Dhabi or Riyadh, someone is finally asking whether $100 billion to build a canal through Oman's mountains is actually the cheaper option. Because the cost of not building it, we're living it right now. This is Rakel Meadow News. If this video opened your eyes, share it. Someone you know needs to understand what's happening before it hits their wallet. I'll see you in the next one.